I get a lot of students come to me with very good fully formed technique who want to push their guitar playing further, but we often find within the first few lessons that there are some fundamental gaps in their knowledge. This often comes in the form of not knowing their note names on the fretboard. So this video is aimed at guitar players who may be quite comfortable playing, they can jam with their friends and stuff, but who want to actually learn what these note names are that might be beneficial in like a session context, or if you're playing with bigger groups and things like this. As far as I'm concerned, I think there's two different methods to learning the notes on the fretboard. There's the position method, which is often taught to classical guitar students, and what's really interesting is a lot of the younger students I get who've come from a classical guitar background already know in all, if not most of the notes in first position. First position, by the way, if you don't already know, is when we use our first finger to play all the first fret notes, second all the second fret notes, third and fourth. So basically anything in this first 4 fret gap is first position. So that's one method of learning the notes. I think that's really successful, especially with these younger students, but my older students, more mature students, if I was teaching these guys one note per week, literally every single note, they'd get bored out of their minds and probably quit straight away. So the method I'm going to talk about today is an approach I like, which is the linear method, learning the strings, notes of the fretboard along the strings. And I'm going to group this in 3 groups of 2 strings, so the E and A string, D and G, B and E. This is useful for the fundamental reason is that I teach it this way is because we prioritize learning the note names on the bottom 2 strings, because this helps learning chord shapes and scale shapes. So if I say to a student, play me B flat major or play me F sharp melodic minor, they know where to start these positions that they've already learned. Okay, so let me talk you through the things we need to pick up on first to work this out. I need you to memorize, I think it's 9 different notes on the fretboard, or 8 different notes on the fretboard, alongside the open strings. And from this relatively small amount of knowledge, we can work out any note on the fretboard, okay? The guitar, I don't think, is a very visual instrument for learning the notes. Unlike a keyboard, you can see here, each note has a distinct look to itself. We've got the black notes, which are grouped in 2s, 3s, 2s, 3s, like this. So every D note, for example, is in between 2 black notes. Every G sharp or A flat is the middle of the 3 black notes. But on the guitar, especially if we don't have markings, but even with markings, everything sort of looks the same. The first thing we need to learn is the open strings, which, don't worry if you don't know these already. A surprising amount of students come to me not knowing these off by heart, but still being able to play a few songs. Names of the open strings are E, A, D, G, B, E, and that's from low to high. I'll talk about perfect fourth tuning towards the end of this video, but it does still apply here. Easiest way to remember this, and if you're teaching younger students, here's 3 different ways you can teach this. I like to use elephants and donkeys grow big ears. You can also use Eddie 8 Dynamite Goodbye Eddie, though I'm pretty sure goodbye is one word, so that sort of bothers me enough to not use that one. And I used to use eggs are daft given before Easter. So they're 3 different phrases. The good one with elephants and donkeys grow big ears is easy to distinguish between the low and high string, because the elephant string is the big thick string, the thickest string on the guitar. So for the younger students, it's easy to remember a big elephant for that thick string. The next notes that we're going to learn are the marked notes on the fretboard, and there's a very good reason we learn these, but let me show you them first. These are really easy to remember if you know a few shapes. So if you know your C major shape, then the lowest note in the C major chord is 3rd fret on the A string, which is our C note. It must be a C note because it's the root note of the chord. Same thing with the G chord. 3rd fret on the E string is a G. Now the next 2 notes, if you tune your guitar using the 5th fret method, then you know that 5th fret must be open D string because of that method there, and 5th fret on the E string must be open A string. So we've got D, which is 5th fret on the A string, and A, which is 5th fret on the E string. The next 2 work in reverse, so whereas the 5th fret on one string is the same as the string below, the 7th fret on one string is the same as the string above, this way. So 7th fret on the A string is an E, and 7th fret on the E string is a B. If you think about these 2 strings here, the E and the B, 7th fret on the E string is a B note. So far we've got 3rd fret on the A is a C, 3rd fret on the E is a G, 5th fret on the A is a D, 5th 5th fret on the E is an A, 7th fret on the A is an E, 7th fret on the E is a B, and then the last two, these can be a little bit tricky. 9th fret on the A string is either an F sharp or a G flat. We're going to talk about sharps and flats in a second. These notes have two names, F sharp or G flat. And then 9th fret on the E string is either C sharp or D flat. So we've got the open strings, and then we've got the names of the notes on the low 2 strings. I'm going to put a little infographic or little picture in front of the screen now that you should be able to see, which is detailing those. Feel free to screenshot this and print it out if you think that's going to be useful, and stick that on your wall or in your guitar folder. And let's get these memorized first. So that's nearly as much information as you need to memorize. The rest we're going to use intuition to work out the rest of the notes. So we can already eliminate anything from the 12th fret upwards on all 6 strings. We don't need to worry about those, because as soon as we get 12 frets higher than a note, we repeat. So 12 frets higher than the open E string is the 12th fret itself, and that's just an E again. So any notes you learn down here, you automatically learn up here, so we don't need to worry about that. The next thing you might be wondering is, well, why have we just learnt these dotted notes? Why haven't we learnt the first 4 and then the next 4 and things, you know, in order like that? The reason is these are going to be our reference points. So just by learning these 8 notes, these 4 notes on each of these 2 strings, we can already work out every single note on here. The reason is we either already know the note, so we know the C, the G, the D, A, E, B, F sharp, G flat, and C sharp, D flat already, and any note we're asked to play, let's say we get asked to play, okay, the 4th fret on the E string, what's that? We can just use the musical alphabet to work that out. So this is where we get into sharps and flats. In between almost all the notes on a keyboard, not all of them, but almost all the notes, is a sharp or a flat. So when we transfer from G to A, you can see there's a note in between G and A. Here's our G, here's our A, and we've got the 4th fret there. In between the two is a note with 2 names. It's either G sharp, which is 1 semitone above G in pitch, so we go G, G sharp to A, or you can think of it as A flat, which is 1 semitone below A. And here's the important, easy way to remember the difference between sharps and flats. Sharp, if we sharpen a note, so turn a note from A to A sharp or C to C sharp, we raise it by 1 semitone, and that on the guitar involves going up 1 fret. Easiest way to remember that is if you poke someone with something sharp, they're going to jump up in alarm and pain. So think of poking someone with something sharp and them jumping up. So that's up in pitch. The opposite is flat. And if you imagine that you're driving in your car and you get a flat tyre, or all your tyres go flat, then your car's going to go down because the air's gone out of your tyre. So think of flat as down a semitone, so down in pitch. So this is D to D flat, and then a sharp is going up a semitone, so D to D sharp here. The symbols for those two, sharp is the hashtag symbol you're used to seeing on Twitter, the hash symbol. It just looks like a 3x3 little grid you might use for noughts and crosses. So if that's before a note, that's sharp, and the flat symbol is like an italic lowercase b, which is just before a note, and I'll put those two on screen now. So we've got a sharp and we've got a flat. So just by using the notes that we've already learned and that simple method, we can work this out. So if I ask you, for example, I tell you what, this is going to be a much better way of doing it. I'm going to ask you a bunch of notes, and I'm going to put the answers to those questions in the description. So this is going to be the first part of the quiz. I'm going to ask you a bunch of notes here. Before we do this, there's one more piece of information you need to know. There is no note in between B and C, so there's no B sharp, no C flat. There's no note in between E and F, so there's no E sharp and there's no F flat note, okay? So I'm just going to talk you through the low E string. We've got E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, so straight to C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. And if I go backwards, I'll talk in terms of flats now. So we've got E, E flat, D, D flat, C, B, straight to B, B flat, A, A flat, G, G flat, F, straight to E. So remember, nothing between E and F. Here's an E and F on the keyboard. Nothing between there. There's no black note there. And nothing between B and C here. There's no black note there, okay? So here is, I'm going to give you 10 notes, okay? The first one. So what is the note of, it's going to be 2nd fret on the A string. So number 1 is 2nd fret on the A string. So question number 2 will be 6th fret on the A string. 6th fret on the A string. Number 3 will be 4th fret on the E string. 4th fret on the E string. Number 4 will be 8th fret on the E string. 8th fret on the E string. Number 5 will be, let's do 10th fret on the A string. 10th fret on the A string. Number 6 will be 1st fret on the A string. That's 1st fret on the A string. Number 7 will be 3rd fret on the E string. 3rd fret on the E string is number 7. Number 8 will be 8th fret on the A string. 8th fret on the A string. Number 9 will be 5th fret on the E string. 5th fret on the E string, and then number 10, the very last one, will be 12th fret on the A string. So grab a pen and paper. If you need to rewind or pause, that's absolutely fine. When you write this down, make sure you write the word sharp so that you know how that's pronounced and written down properly. S-H-A-R-P, and flat is F-L-A-T, as straightforward as you would imagine. It doesn't really matter now whether you really write the word or the symbol, but when we look later on, and in some other videos I do, I'll ask you to identify note names, and it's important that you can translate that symbol instantly and read it as sharp or flat when you see it, okay? So that's the note names on the bottom 2 strings. If you want to check the results in the description, hopefully you got 100% there. If not, go back to that little screenshot you might have taken before. Make sure you've memorized these little islands, these little reference points correctly. Remember, there's no note between B and C, there's no note between E and F, and try that one more time. So it might be that you made 1 or 2 mistakes, that's totally normal, but try and work out why you might have made those mistakes, why you might have thought of it wrong. The next stage, now, so already, just by that, in the first sort of 10 minutes of this video, if you've been following okay, you've basically learnt the note names on the bottom 2 strings, or at least learnt a way to work out the note names on the bottom 2 strings, which is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do. The next thing we need to learn is the note names on the next 2 strings, and this is incredibly easy. We just use the octave shape to help turn one of these notes into one of the notes on the E and A string that we might already know. So this is the stage where we start to have to add layers of translation. So it's like if you're learning a new language, you might learn mnemonics for new words or symbols. Eventually, the more you practice this, if you put the hours in, you'll stop having to use these as reference points. You'll start seeing 4th fret as C sharp or D flat. You won't have to use the reference. And the same will apply to these notes on the other 2 strings, okay? So the notes on the D and G string, we can use this shape, so the octave shape on the guitar. If you play any note on the bottom 2 strings, so I'm going to do 3rd fret on the E string, to play the octave above that, the octave, by the way, is the exact same note, but moved up one whole set of 12 notes in the musical scale. So for example, the open E to 12th fret, they're both E notes and they're one whole octave apart. So it's the next E up, or the next one of those notes up. Let's do 3rd fret on the E string. To do the octave shape, we do 2 strings down, which is going to take us to the D string, 2 frets along. So 2 strings down, we've picked the 3rd fret on the E string, 2 strings down would take us to the G string, 2 frets along would take us to 5th fret on the D string. And that's essentially all you need to do to worry about these 2 notes. So anytime you're given a note or you have to work a note on the D and G string, you work backwards from there. So let's go through a few examples, and I'm going to give you another quick quiz again, so it'll be quiz number 2. But yeah, let's work that out together. So here's some examples putting that into practice. I'm going to pick some random notes on the D and G string, and we're going to work through working those note names out using the two methods we just talked about there. The octave to take us back to the E and A string, and then the reference points of the notes we learned at the start of the lesson. So if I pick 9th fret on the D string, for example, 9th fret on the D string, first thing we need to do is our octave shape to take it back an octave. So this way we go down 2 strings and along, down 2 strings and down 2 frets. So that's going to take us down to 7th fret on the E string, which we know from the beginning is a B. So this note, the 9th fret on the D string, must be a B note. Let's do another one. So 4th fret on the G string, we'll do the same. Actually, no, let's not do that because that's exactly the same note. Let's do 8th fret on the G string. So 8th fret on the G string, what note is this? Let's take it back our octave shape here to 6th fret on the A string. Now, 6th fret wasn't the ones we learned early on. It wasn't one of our original ones we showed in that screenshot. But it's in between two that we do know. It's in between the 5th fret on the A, which is a D, and it's in between that D, and it's in between 7th fret on the A, which is an E. So it's in between our D and E, which must mean that it's either D sharp or E flat. I'm going to call it D sharp for now. So we know that 8th fret on the G string must be a D sharp. We'll do one more example. So 4th fret on the D string, take that back the octave, is 2nd fret on the E string. That's 1 fret below our G note. We know it's the G because of the G chord. So 1 fret below, it's 1 fret down, and we know down comes from the flat, because if we've got flat tires on the car goes down. So the 2nd fret on the E string must be G flat, or the other name for it could be F sharp, okay? I'm going to give you a few more examples now. I'm going to give you 10 examples of notes on the D and G string, see if you can work these out for me, and then we're going to try and learn the last 2 notes together. And this is where things differ slightly if you're using the perfect fourth tuning. You might have seen in one of my other videos. Here we go. I'll tell you what, let's do 5 examples for this in the interest of moving things along. So I'm going to do 5 examples on the D and G string, and we'll call this quiz number 2, okay? So first note will be, let's do 3rd fret on the G string. 3rd fret on the G string. Number 2 will be 6th fret on the D string. Number 3 will be 11th fret on the G string. Number 4 will be 5th fret on the D string. And our very last one will be 2nd fret on the D string. I'm going to write the answers for these in both sharp and flat format, so if you want to write either of those, it's fine. Both answers are correct. And the very last set of strings is the bottom 2, the B and E string, but these ones are pretty straightforward. You already know the notes on the E string, because the same rules from the low E string apply up here, because it's exactly the same. Just so we can apply the same sort of logic, we're going to use this octave shape on these 2 strings as well, even though you know the notes on the E string. But remember, when we're going from the D string or the G string onto the B or E string, we have to use this octave shape. So instead of it being 2 strings down 2 frets along, it's 2 strings down 3 frets along. And this is where it differs if you're in perfect fourth tuning. Obviously your top 2 strings would be a C and F rather than B and E, but also you just use the same octave shape as before, the 2 strings down 2 frets along, if you're playing in perfect fourths and want to work this out. But back to standard. I'm going to talk about standard for the rest of the video, because this is aimed at the majority of my students who are playing in standard tuning. So to do that, let's use some examples for this, and we'll do 5 more examples of that. So let's do 11th fret on the B string. We would take it down the octave shape, which is 2 strings down 3 frets along, and then we take this one, the D, again down 2 strings, 2 frets along, to take it to the E or A string. What we're doing with this method is to take the notes on the D, G, B and E string back to the E and A string so we can use the reference points we learned at the start of our lesson. Again, this might seem, especially for the top notes, this might seem quite clumsy, but this is supposed to be a method that requires as little actual memorization as possible. You just had to memorize these 8 notes and the open strings, and the rest you just work out yourself. The idea isn't that for the rest of your career you're going to have to go, okay, what note is this? Is this what I do? I just jump down it. It doesn't work like that. The more you practice it, the more that you're going to know that that's an F and that's a C and this is a G. You know, you're not going to have to do this method each time. Also, you're going to get to a point where you don't actually have to do the... You can visually see that they're 2 octaves apart just with your fretboard knowledge, so you know that must be an E flat just because you can actually see the shape there. So this is just to get you in the ballpark without having to sit and memorize a bunch of different notes and different positions, and it forces you to think about working these things out yourself, and I find that sticks in students' heads a lot better than literally just saying, right, this is an A, this is a B, this, you know, I find this more beneficial. You might disagree, and that's absolutely fine. So let's do just a couple of examples on the top 2 strings, and I'll do one final quiz for these 2 strings, okay? So if, let's say we had a 6th fret on the B string, we go down 2 strings, 3 frets along because we're crossing that G-B barrier, and then we do the octave shape here. So again, the octave shape from the E and A to the D and G or back is this shape, 2 strings, 2 frets. And the important thing to remember is from the D and G to the B and E, we have to do 2 strings, 3 frets. So let's do 2 more examples. Let's do 9th fret on the E string. So we're doing 9th fret, back to 6th fret on the G string, down to 4th fret on the A string, so that must be a C sharp. We know that's a C sharp. We also know that's a C sharp already because we know this is a C sharp and these are exactly the same, but the method still holds. Let's do one last one. Let's do 7th fret on the B string. I'm not sure if we've done this one already, so that would be 2 strings down, 3 frets along, and then 2 strings down, 2 frets along, 2nd fret on the E string, which is an F sharp or G flat. So we know that's an F sharp or a G flat. In my hurry to try and make this video as concise as possible, I managed to forget to actually do the final quiz, so here we go. We're going to do 5 notes on the top 2 strings, so use those octave shapes to help find your way. Number 1 is going to be 6th fret on the E string. 6th fret on the E string. Number 2 is going to be 9th fret on the B string. 9th fret on the B string. Number 3 is going to be 1st fret on the E string. 1st fret on the E string. Number 4 is going to be 8th fret on the B string. 8th fret on the B string. And number 5 is going to be 3rd fret on the B string. And that's basically it. That's the entirety of this method, okay? It's like I mentioned a few moments ago, it can seem a little bit cumbersome, but all you've got to memorize for this are your octave shapes, these 8 notes on the fretboard, and your open strings, which you probably already know anyway, and that way it will allow you to work out all the notes on the fretboard. I prioritize learning, and I would suggest you prioritize learning the note names on the bottom 2 strings if you don't know them already, because when you start using your bar chord shapes and your scale shapes, 99% of the shapes that I know and I teach students are rooted on the low 2 strings. So if I ask you to play A flat super Locrian scale, you know where your first note needs to be because you know the notes down here, okay? If you're sight reading, obviously, you need to be a lot more familiar with the notes, but the odds are if you've already gone down that path, you've started with maybe a bit more of a classical repertoire. If you're you know, a jazz guitarist, you've started learning these notes already. This is aimed at students who are maybe a bit more, they're self-learners, they maybe play by ear a lot, and this is you know, new to them. Using that screenshot I showed you before, and I'll just put it up again now, that screenshot, all you need is those basic starting reference notes, the knowledge of the repeating octave shapes, and also, just to recap again, the knowledge that there is no note in between B and C, no note in between E and F, and then everything moves in increments of sharps or flats. So between G and A there's a G sharp or an A flat, between D and E there's a D sharp and an E flat, for example. It doesn't just go C, D, E, F, G. So we weren't learning any crazy licks this week, but I hope this is going to be helpful in your playing in the future. Certainly when you're learning new songs, if you grab the tabs off Ultimate Guitar or just the chords, you know, it can be really helpful if you come up with a B flat and you have no idea where to start. And if you're playing in bands with other people, you can just shout out chord names to each other without actually having to show each other where to put your fingers. And also, it's a nice thing to know on the guitar. I like to know as much as I can about the instrument. It's not only is it my job, but I love it. It's why I play guitar. So if there's something I don't know about it, I like to learn, and maybe you're the same. Thanks very much for watching. I've got some other videos basically focusing around music theory for guitar players coming up soon, which may be beneficial to you, so stay tuned for that, and please let me know if you found this video useful. Thanks very much.